Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and look forward to this thought leader session with Dr. Vikas Joshi, Chairman, CEO, founder, and all-around swell guy at Harbinger Group, and some of his teammates here. And certainly thank you for Devyani, Bob, and Bill for joining as panelists. Look forward to hearing your thoughts on some of these topics around the strategies that these companies need to leverage, especially the startups in these uncertain times. So with that, Dr. Joshi, if you'd like to continue the discussion, please. Thank you.
Sure. So I hope everyone can see my screen here. And thank you, Ward, and a very warm welcome to everybody. Today we have startup founders in the audience and seasoned leaders in the panel that I will introduce.
We see you, but not your screen.
We don't see your screen yet, Vikas.
Okay, great. I wanted to make sure you are alert and mindful.
There we go.
Are we good?
Yes.
You got it.
Okay, great. Excited to be with you because I'm a tech entrepreneur myself, just like many of you are. I too founded a startup and grew it over past 30 years to Harbinger, the leader in product engineering. And in Harbinger's business over the past 30 years, we have helped hundreds of startups achieve breakout growth. And again, for my doctorate, I studied successful tech entrepreneurs and the learning and development processes of entrepreneurial leaders. So as you can see, this session goes right to the heart of my passion. And so really excited to have this power-packed keynote panel here. I'll introduce everybody in just a second, but first let me show you what we're going to get today. We are looking to accomplish really three things. First, a bird's eye view on where the market is going. Second, stories on how startups are doing their product strategy. And finally, some tips on stretching the dollar and compressing time. Does that sound like a lot? Maybe it is, we'll see. But here's what we will not do. As a founder, you need to worry about a lot of things, right? To raise money, find early customers, build MVP, and what have you. But we're going to only pick three of your worries today. How to discern the key market shifts, how to respond to uncertainty from a product perspective, and how to sustain momentum. That's all we will do today. So now is the perfect time to introduce our panelists. Welcome, Devyani, Bob, and Bill. So good to have you here. Would you please tell us a bit about yourselves and tell us what makes you interested in talking to entrepreneurs? And maybe perhaps you could get us started, Devyani, is that okay?
Devyani, we can hear you.
You're perhaps muted.
At all or?
There, now. Now we can hear you.
Okay, so I shall get closer. I don't know what the issue is. Let me just increase the, yeah, I'm on full volume actually. Okay.
We can hear you nicely.
Okay, great. So yeah, so good morning everyone. I am Devyani Vaishampayan. I'm based in London. For around 30 years, I've worked as a senior HR director or a chief human resource officer in large international businesses. But what I do now is quite different. My firm, the HR Tech Partnership, does two things. We manage an angel investment fund that invests in AI or digital HR startups. And my investors are all FTSE 100 group HRDs or NEDs. So it's very much about domain expertise coming into the investment rather than just pure money. The second thing we do is we run a human capital digital innovation hub, which helps corporates experiment or engage with innovative AI-based solutions. So I guess my world today is very much interacting with two groups of people, which are actually very far apart. The first is startups, and particularly relatively early stage tech and AI-based HR startups, but also at the same time, corporates and senior HR leaders.
Thank you. Thank you, Devyani. Welcome to the panel. Bob, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Great to meet everyone. My name's Bob Maiden. I'll sort of start from my current position, work backwards slightly. I am currently the managing director for a merger and acquisition firm called Focus Investment Banking. I lead our human capital management industry team at Focus. Human capital management for us typically has three big buckets. One is contract staffing, one is recruiting, primarily RPO, and then the third biggest bucket is HR tech. We are a middle market investment bank, 3 offices in the US, Washington, DC, Atlanta, and LA, about 35 investment bankers across the country, strong emphasis in North America. Prior to getting into M&A, I really was a founder of a startup and CFO for a startup, so I've spent most of my career in startups. I founded a software training business, and 16 years after starting it, we exited as a distance learning, e-learning, SaaS business that was focused in online medical education. So I'm a big fan of pivoting, and I think there's a lot of startups that end up find success in something other than what they originally started, and we're certainly an example of that. And prior to my own business, I was CFO of a startup software firm in the Philadelphia area in the fintech space, and for that, spent a little time with KPMG. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
And should I go? This is Bill.
Sure, Bill.
Sure.
Thanks.
Hi. I'm nice to participate in this today. I'm Bill Filip. My background is kind of a combination of both private equity and investment banking. I've done a lot in the human capital area. I was with Robert W. Baird for over 20 years, both on the investment banking side, where I did focus on human capital, and then also had an opportunity to co-found the Baird Capital platform, where I was on the buy side. I think I made 16 HR-related investments where we were the lead investor there. So HR has been a real core focus on really all aspects from, I like to say, from the service models on the left with Google or gross margins to the SaaS technology on the right, and then in between the solution type businesses that have a combination of technology and service. Founded Delancy Street Partners about 8 years ago, and our focus is kind of middle market investment banking, and then again, my focus once again is on business and tech services with a very strong focus in HR and HR technology. I'm currently working on 5 different transactions, 4 of which are in the HR tech space. So we're very active both in the sell side, advisory, and capital raising as well. And then I sit on 4 boards of directors as well.
Great. Good to have you again. And let's get right into it then. So our game plan for today, like we talked just a while ago, is threefold: discerning the market shifts, responding to uncertainty, and sustaining momentum. What's going on in the market? Before we get our panelists to share their insights, here's a few thoughts that I put together. When you look at the HR tech investments, a very interesting pattern. Q1 was about 400 million, and in Q2 this year, the funding dipped more than 50%. It went to 185 million. Q3, however, is back up again with a bang, and you have 396 million till date with a month and a few days to go. So funding is right back to where it was last year, almost. And who got funded? Obviously, the usual suspects: SaaS-based HR products, AI/ML, benefits, skill development. Those were the categories. And more good news. As you can see, the M&A is a thriving market. There's a bunch of talent tech acquisitions, productivity and engagement acquisitions going on. What's driving this growth? The growth drivers are primarily in the short term: remote work. Everybody's working from home or from wherever they are. Gig workers, contingent staffing, empathy, humanization, a concern for the wellness and well-being of individuals, because people are having a hard time balancing their work lives and the pandemic and its effects. And finally, a shift from just pure efficiency to resilience, because in times of uncertainty, so many things can break down that you need to have the resilience to continue business and to continue to satisfy customers. In the long term, though, some of these vectors have been there from before. The digitization, increased data collection and opportunities for data analytics and machine learning, contactless delivery models, all types of service delivery as well as goods delivery, and finally reskilling. Those are some of the big growth drivers I could discern. Let's go right to our panel here and ask them what they think this shift means for HR tech startups. Go in any sequence, share any thoughts or stories you have, all yours.
I'd be happy to go first. As we saw by the numbers there, HR tech was a very popular category, certainly in M&A and in investment. Pre-COVID, there was some adjustment or slowdown, during the second quarter, as everybody probably expected, and we're seeing it rise back up. The fact that it's tied to remote work is only going to accelerate the pace. Remote work was capability before COVID, but it has really ramped up the demand for remote work solutions. So from what we've seen in HR tech, but let me take it back to the startup environment. The startups are always going to face a lot of uncertainty, right? We can all agree with that. And the issue, I think, for a lot of startups that COVID probably brought into play is the funding source. They may have had private equity or venture capital with portfolio companies that were being affected, positively, negatively, in many cases negatively. And that shifts some of the attention of their funding sources from possibly their rounds to portfolio companies. So, it's a different story as a startup than it is for a mature business for many reasons. But from a funding standpoint, it definitely could cause some interruption in that stream of funds. Although from a category standpoint, there is a lot of attention being paid to it. It might mean that you need to go to, a new pool of investors rather than your current investors, simply because they may have more important things to be focused on. So I'll sort of pause with that.
Got it.
Yeah, I think I'd add, there's obviously, particularly a small business and a startup, limited capital, limited team. It's the time where you absolutely have to be nimble and react to the market. And I think no other time period that I've ever seen where that is more important. And I've seen some really amazing pivots. And I don't even like the word pivot, but you need to figure out how your product or service right now is relevant to this current market environment. And if you're a small business with limited balance sheet, more important to do that and make the right calls. And I've seen business models in HR tech that have obviously virtual components to them, where all of a sudden the demand is just right there. That's the point of pain. That's the entry point. And being able to obviously be in a position to react to that and guide that conversation. I'm working with one business that they end up focusing at the ed tech end of the spectrum within talent. And they were working around the clock during COVID just to get people lifted up, get pain point to become the incumbent, then down the road to be able to upsell the whole suite. So real, I think, common sense things like that. But I think in this current environment, as we're, you've got to be relevant. You've got to have something that solve a pain for people. And I've seen some really smart businesses kind of, direct the conversation that way. One other thing I'd say is, it's not overly tech in ultimate delivery, but we've seen a lot of the fractional resource models really perform actually very well in this environment relative to like a staffing model. And I think that is really, I think I followed staffing for a long, long time. Typically, staffing firms kind of lead into a recession, but then lead out of the recession. And obviously, this is not an economic-driven scenario, but obviously, if you look at the staffing world, it's way down, performance way down, valuations way down. But we've seen some of these virtual fractional models where they're high-level people perform really nicely right through this. So I take that comment.
Great.
Angle here, because you also work a lot with business leaders and HR leaders, particularly large corporates. And I think firstly, from a business perspective, there are kind of three main drivers for a lot of business leaders right now around the workforce and people side. The first is costs, because clearly people costs are still typically around 30% of any big organization, and everyone is under pressure now. So restructuring, reducing cost is a very common focus. The second is, I think, a change in business models and the shift to more of online, which again means in terms of workforce capability skills, a lot of them have to rapidly rethink both of adding on new skills, but also reduction of some traditional skills. And I think the third thing is what remote working has accelerated is the need for slightly different skill sets. So at the senior leader or at the senior leadership level, clearly acting quite quickly and decisively, but also, as I think Vikas said, being quite empathetic is turning out to be quite a challenge, especially if you consider that the traditional business skills needed in CEOs and senior leaders was more the top-down kind of, traditional kind of almost an alpha male kind of skills. At the team leader level, remote working is really making their jobs quite different and difficult because people management now needs to be far more virtual. And then thirdly, I think in terms of employees, resilience is being priced quite a bit. So I think in terms of startups, solutions, and the need, some of the shifts in demand is making it imperative for them to pivot. And the three areas where I'm seeing a lot more of change and pivoting, but also demand happening. The first is clearly recruitment. On one hand, the need for recruitment has gone down. Traditional recruitment solutions has gone down because in general, hiring has come down quite heavily, but equally the need for contingency staff has gone up. And the kind of pivoting I'm also seeing, for example, one of our investee companies is Recruitment Smart. And what they've done is they've also created an internal talent matching platform now, which probably in large corporates is far more needed than your traditional external hiring. So recruitment as an area or resourcing or talent acquisition is seeing both a slowdown in demand, but areas such as onboarding, etc., are seeing a huge increase in demand. The second key area of increase in demand is wellness. And again, I think Vikas referred to it, whether it's empathetic, it's emotional, but mental health is clearly seeing a big increase. And so solutions around mental health, but also physical safety, whether it is COVID restrictions, but also ensuring employees working from home are physically, still assisted in terms of their physical fitness, wellness, etc. So I think that's the second big area of growth and demand. And then the third big area where I'm hearing business leaders and HR leaders say there is really going to be no cut in budgets is learning and upskilling. And again, even though there are cuts happening in other places, a lot of them are still protecting the L&D budgets. But yes, I think it means almost every HR startup I meet is looking either pivoting quite a lot or pivoting a little bit. So as an example, I think just yesterday we spoke to a startup whose focus was really gender pay equality. And so of course the underlying theme was fairness, but apart from pay now, they're pivoting into more of talent, but also policies and processes. And so from from a gender pay focus, the startup solution is now focused on fairness, whether it is pay, whether it's talent, or whether it's policies. So that's the kind of change and agility that I'm seeing in startups right now.
Thanks. Thank you, Devyani. Those are great points. I think it's a whole list of opportunities that you recounted here. And whatever you did toward the end of your talk, just keep doing that, because now we can hear you a lot better. So just moving on here and asking the question, what does this shift mean for your business? And I think there are 4 broad areas we need to talk about. Firstly, the buyer dynamics. We all are almost by definition B2B, right? So enterprise B2B. So the B2B buyers tend to be in favor of stakeholder collaboration in the buying process. So the buyer dynamics is shifting slightly. It's many stakeholders that you need to satisfy and enable them to collaborate to take a buying decisions. 96% companies, this is according to a survey in July, have already shifted their go-to-market model to remote selling. So that's got huge implications for sales strategy. 84% of tech leaders are on their way to adopt cloud-based architecture. That's a given. And finally, there's a 36% reduction in tech job postings in July. That tells me that it's a possible indication of reduced engineering budgets. And I guess Devyani referred to that just a while ago. So those are the business implications of the market shifts. What are the product implications? Really 3 things: changing customer priorities, because some of the roadmap items that you have been carrying on your product roadmap may be irrelevant. There's something else that matters to them. They're thinking about work policy changes, work hours, back to work, reskilling, contingent staffing. So there may be new items in place of your roadmap items. Secondly, changing user behaviors. So there's perhaps an increased demand for Zoom integration, Slack integration, Teams integration to permit virtual collaboration and remote work, and a heightened need for safety. So that introduces new items on your roadmap. And finally, reduced capacity. I'm not just talking about your capacity in terms of, the money that you have to build out your product, but the reduced capacity on the part of your customer. They have fewer people, they have distracted people, they do not have as much time to evaluate your product, to make a good buy decision. They may not have protracted trials. So, and they have reduced capacity to buy. I mean, a recent survey says that there is at least a 7% reduction in HR budgets. So that directly goes to the need to make your product easy to evaluate, easy to try, easy to buy, easy to cancel. All those things are the product implications of market shifts. So with that, we put the market behind us and we move to strategies. How do we respond to this? Customer priorities are shifting, user behaviors are shifting, new opportunities are surfacing. At the same time, budgets are shrinking and there's a lot of uncertainty. How do we respond to that? My marketing professor at Harvard used to say, when you are in doubt, start with the customer. So that's precisely what we're going to do, start with the customer. The first and foremost, I would say, is get closer to customers. And I was talking to a senior product management leader at an e-learning provider last week, and what she said was their customers are now even more open than before to share feedback. It's getting easier to get closer to customers because they're okay with doing it over Zoom. There are many tools you can use, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. The second thing is the feedback is more genuine. I was on a panel with a chief product officer of a leading employee survey company, and they do engagement assessments. And here's what he said. When customers are in stressful situations, they tend to focus on things that they value the most. And therefore, you're going to get more genuine feedback from them, because they're going to have you build features that are most impactful. In regular times, you go to them, you show them a cute feature, and they're going to say, yeah, it'd be nice to have that. But in these times, they're going to be very focused on the big problems, and that's the good news. And finally, you need to engage with them continuously. This cannot be an episodic process, you know, it's not an annual user conference anymore. One of our customers from the background check industry told us something very interesting. They said, while their focus stays on customer success in the long term, and so the long-term roadmap does not change, they're putting special attention to help address the customer's short-term challenges by engaging with them continuously. For example, there's a food safety provider. This is a software for auditing and food safety. And they work with very large food processors. And they said the immediate need was to facilitate safe shift change, because as workers hand over from one shift to the other, the next shift's workers, how do you accomplish that in a safe fashion? That was the most important thing for them as soon as the pandemic started. So sometimes you have to keep an eye on the long term, but keep satisfying the customer's short-term needs as well. Then how do you engage continuously with customers? Exactly how do you accomplish that? And for that, there are tools. And maybe, Ward, we should do a little poll here to find out how are our participants using various tools and techniques to get closer to the customers.
All right.
And here,
Yeah, it's a great question. I wasn't even familiar with one of these, so we'll see if anybody votes for it.
Is it us or is it what we see happening?
yeah, the question was for the startup founders, and I guess since you have many founders, maybe you can write on their behalf. What do you see them using?
Okay.
How are they getting closer to customers?
All right, still bouncing around. I guess you can pick as many as you use. All right. There's a couple more seconds.
And of course, feel free to chat in anything that you use that is cool and we may not have listed here. There's always room to learn. All right, here's the results. Yes, a lot of people are using Hotjar. We do too. It tracks user behaviors. We get to see the heat maps, session recordings, surveys. It works great. Mouseflow is interesting because it tells you where they are dropping off, whether there are any blank submissions or refills, errors. It's a great tool. Google Analytics, all-time favorite to figure out what's happening. SurveyMonkey, we know all about it. But interviews is the winner, right? Because that's where you get high quality, qualitative information of the customer's journey. And definitely, we do rely on interviews a lot. And there's the other. We'll see if we see any of that on the chat here. Okay, let's close this and turn to our panel for sort of their thoughts and ideas on. Are you happy with how close your portfolio companies are with their customers? Could they do more? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I'll jump in first. And one thing I'd say before I answer that question, your lead into this about the current situation and the uncertainty, I mean, I think you hit it exactly on the head, because as you were going through that, my blood pressure was rising as I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs, because that is exactly the scenario that's going on. It's all of a sudden the customer priorities are trumping yours, and you need to figure out, like, again, how to be relevant to them. the one thing I would add to this, and you're hitting on the head. I mean, for young companies, that they don't have any advantage if they're not nimble and quick and being able to react quickly to their environment. And that's the big advantage they have. In most of the business models I work with, there is a channel element to the sale, and particularly if you can find a channel that can really light up, it's a beautiful way to stand up a lot of revenue quickly and gain mind share and adoption. And it's not as analytically focused as you just mentioned on those solutions, but looking for common clients and to prove use cases and relevancy, particularly if that channel is large, and what are they reacting to in this time? I mean, they need a win-win. They want happy clients, and we actively target customers that we know are partners with other large entities that could resell or you could build into their platform. So looking for those crossovers where you can demonstrate the impact on another channel's clients, always a really great way to get close, get attention, have them do the work, and everyone, it's a win-win for everyone. And so we are always kind of trying to execute on one or two channel partners on everything I'm working on, and just kind of looking for those crossovers of joint clients are a really, really great way to get traction with a big channel partner.
Great point.
Yeah, I would just add that and this goes back a little bit to the conversation, the discussion around market shifts. When you think how much has changed in such a short period of time, I mean, it's an overdone phrase here, but it's amazing that if we were back in April and May, we would be talking more about return to normal. And here we are in August, and we know there's going to be a new normal. We're talking about 4 months, 5 months maybe on the outset. So the recognition that there is going to be a new normal here, and from the customer standpoint, as has been mentioned, their investments are changing, because if you're a manufacturing business, you're worried about getting products, raw materials in, and getting product out the door. HR budgets have always been somewhat expendable. If you had planned to do a big implementation of a learning management system, you may have on hold right now, or any type of a HR non-core business investment. So the idea of really listening to the customers and getting as close as you can, which as I understand is a real core agile principle, is always been important, but it's even more important now. You also have to be really, really cognizant of what's going on with your competition. What are your competitors doing? What changes are they making? That is something that would be information that's important for you to consider. Is it something that works for you, doesn't work for you? What are they doing? And if there's ever time to be flexible, and you may need to go ahead and change focus here and there, that's certainly something we're going to see a lot of in the coming months.
Sure.
Right. So one of the things I've seen quite a few startups do very well during this period, just keeping in mind that it has been a difficult period for their customers. They've had to be sensitive about, the situation. I think a lot of them have also therefore been careful about not approaching a selling mode, but really adopting more of either education, awareness, thought leadership, you can call it whatever you like, but really trying to see whether they can still be connected to customers via whether it's workshops, webinars, survey feedback, but also connecting customers together, because the need of the hour has been for their customers also to figure out what to do, to be connected with people who are in a similar situation. And I've seen some startups do that very effectively, and therefore add value, not by focusing on their own solution and trying to focus on a sell kind of mode, but trying to see how the customers could be supported via information, knowledge dissemination, which can help them figure out more effectively what they need. And obviously they're going to then remember these people who've been helpful to them during these tough times.
Yes, that's a great point again. This is not the time to sort of push your products, but it's more to sort of build the bridges. So when the budgets become available, you are the first to be called to the table. But this is the time when we get into the core of this presentation, which is pivot or stay the course, right? We are working with a training platform provider, and this is for face-to-face training providers. They have a platform where they can enroll, learners and so on. Their business saw a significant decline once the pandemic hit the US, but they sensed an opportunity in the faith technology. The opportunity surfaced because churches were closing down in the pandemic and they still needed to obviously engage with the community. So they quickly piloted an idea, took it to their beta customers, got some feedback, and made adjustments to their new product. There are several other examples. There's a gig workforce staffing company that's our customer, and they are adding continuous performance management to their gig workforce staffing solution because they realize that the gig workers do keep coming back. So you need to have a track of their performance. Similarly, recruiting service is adding remote onboarding because now you're going to not just stop with recruiting, but you want to bring those people on board in a remote environment. We do have a learner engagement tool that was traditionally used only in a self-paced e-learning context. It's called Raptivity. We realized that with a bunch of training, going over Zoom and other platforms like Adobe and WebEx, we launched a virtual classroom version of our tool. And that's actually getting better traction than the self-paced learning version. So if companies are thinking like us, the first and foremost priority is to conserve cash, right? I mean, you want to just hoard as much cash as you can. That's a no-brainer. But then comes the harder question: what do you do with those resources? Do you concentrate the cash on protecting your current customers, or do you carve out some budgets and pivot to new opportunities? Now, new opportunities are tempting because customers' needs are changing. That means market is moving elsewhere, and we need to be there. But on the other hand, how do we know that the changes to customer needs will persist long enough for the pivot to be profitable? In other words, are we overreacting? So how do you evaluate a pivot? And that's where we go to the next topic. And this is so important because pivot ideas are dime a dozen, but you want to know when to stay the course and how much to deviate before you fully deviate. So let's go right there. And that's where, first off, I'll say that when it comes to product roadmaps, you will have to start thinking in shorter time horizons. One of our learning experience platform customers is collecting feedback from end users on a frequent basis, and they use that to plan their next development sprints. That process has accelerated. The frequency of feedback collection has grown because originally the feedback was not incorporated that quickly, but now they need to be more agile. The trick is to sense an opportunity and make a tentative experiment that is good enough to test the waters. You just want to dip your toe in the water, see what's happening. Is there a real fit here? Is there a real pain point we are solving here? Is our channel really excited about this? Regroup, adjust, and repeat. So this would be as good a time as any to go right back to our panelists again to see if they have any stories where the entrepreneur decided to pivot or not pivot, or stay agile and pivot or not pivot. Over to you, folks.
Well, I can give you a firsthand example of something that I faced 20 years ago. So we had the brick and mortar, as I mentioned, brick and mortar software training business. Our focus was Microsoft applications, Lotus. It dates me a little bit by saying Lotus Notes. We were certified Lotus Notes. Center, Cisco. So we had 2 physical locations, probably a total of 9 or 10 classrooms. And we were faced with, in the late 90s, a decision to either, to basically get into a different business. And it was either to go into e-learning, you were either going synchronous or asynchronous. That was sort of the choice at the time. You're either going to have something that was live, which we were pretty good at from doing the standard classroom model. We did a lot of business in the life sciences, and Merck was our largest account. We walked into Merck one day and made a presentation on how to teach them the same software that we were teaching them in the classroom, but do it virtually and do it in 45-minute chunks. And we got a real thanks, but no thanks. Real nice thanks, but no thanks. They weren't ready for it. And 2 weeks later, we got a call from the same training manager who we had a great relationship with. And he said, Bob, listen, there's a marketing guy here that wants to use this new web conferencing technology to connect our doctors and our key opinion leaders to our customers. And the short story is we had a meeting with them, and they laid out exactly what they wanted to do. And we said, yep, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. And in the car, on the car ride home, we all looked at each other and said, can we do that? And 18 months later, we changed the name of the business to Med Conference, and we're doing online medical education from then after. So it's a very, very tough decision to make that pivot. But I felt that there's a point in time every entrepreneur is going to know there's no turning back. There's no staying with what the old business model was. You have to really go with your gut that the new business model is the winner.
I would say I'd add on to that. You know, certainly we've mentioned kind of live event models or training models, and you know, in some of these, that business went away completely, right? So you're faced with talking about a pivot. You're talking about you need to look at all options to stay alive. And I know several companies where you know, game number one is you know, do what you need to do from a cost structure to live it to fight again another day. I think in most of those that are really, I think, extreme examples where you have live event models or like training models that have been delivered in person, you know, hopefully a lot of those models had been thinking about that, you know, over time, the winning business models are going to be digitally delivered even prior to COVID, right? I mean, I think for sure now the new norm on a lot of these is going to be a combination of those, you know, even when COVID rescinds and stuff like that, a lot of these live event models, training models, they'll come back to a certain level, but I don't think there'll be another day ever where there's not a dual kind of digital kind of format that complements that live event. So, you know, hopefully those businesses were quick enough to identify that, you know, a lot of them had some of the digital business model already there, and they just, you know, full court press on accelerating that adoption. And you know, think of the ability now, if you're up again in a competitive market where you have the ability to do that and your competitors don't. What an amazing opportunity to gain market share. I can't be too specific here, but there was a similar type situation where the buying cycle in this industry was very calendar specific, and the industry by and large didn't have a lot of that budget available when COVID hit. I know one entity that said, hey, look, we're going to come in, save the day, get you guys up on a virtual platform. We're not even going to worry about the contract right now. And if we're going to worry about contract, it's going to be we're going to get you up and running, implement it short-term contract, knowing that when their budget cycle renews, they're the incumbent. And I've watched that strategy now flip over to when this industry has budgets and the conversion is like 90%. So this company just stood up, doubled their installed base by really being smart and nimble in terms of how they interacted with those clients. So, but it's you know, this is, you know, there's a Darwinian nature to this, and if you do not have the capabilities going forward, you know, you better think hard about acquiring them or partnering them. You know, I've seen some of the large live event models, you know, because they didn't have that virtual capability, they had to go out and find it quickly for their clients, or else they were going to lose all their business. So,
yeah. So I wanted to share two examples from our portfolio. one of whom actually has sharpened their focus even more on what they're offering rather than pivoting into something else.
Okay.
And this is a business called Track Active, which uses an AI-based solution for musculoskeletal pain, which is neck and back pain. And now, with remote working being the norm and employees working from home, clearly, I think the demand for the solution, obviously, they sensed would be high enough. And so, I think, if anything, they have done away with some other distractions and focused even more on their core offering, which is a great example of not pivoting, but of course, having an external environment that is favorable. Where I've seen pivoting happen, again, as you said, it's often it's often been accelerated by customers dropping out. And if I take Recruitment Smart, which is the other business in recruitment, just before COVID, I think there was some great momentum happening with big international clients, and then suddenly things came to a bit of a standstill because everybody is kind of freezing recruitment right now. But they'd already begun and were fairly advanced in their internal talent matching solution, which in large corporates, now the focus is more first the internal workforce and reallocation of jobs and giving opportunities internally first. So that's the kind of pivot they've made. The other two kinds of pivots I've seen startups in the current market doing is first is geography. And I'm really talking of UK-based startups here, who traditionally have focused very heavily on the UK, Europe, and then started looking internationally. What I've seen a few of them now do is actively focus in areas like the Middle East, because they felt that the growth there currently is far more, or people are now much more open to digital, but also remote working is making them far more open to these solutions. So that's one kind of pivot I've seen in some of the startups who've shifted focus internationally, particularly the Middle East right now, where they feel the opportunity is more than in Europe, which has always been slow to react, but in the past it was felt to be a bigger market. And then the third kind of pivot that I've seen startups do is some of them have moved away from big enterprise. Now, again, I think it's always been a bit of a dilemma, because on one hand, big enterprise clients have the funding or have the, are able to spend, but the purchasing cycle can often be very long. And I think a few of them have decided it's better to move to the SME, mid-sized. Whereas interestingly, some of the SME ones are now moving towards the big enterprise ones, because they feel actually the sense of urgency is now bigger in big organizations. It all depends on the solution, who you are, what you do. But I'm just saying, I think some of the pivoting is also between small, mid, and large sized customers.
Absolutely. Those are all great examples right there.
Can I ask something? Or
Sure,
is this
please.
out of order?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so nobody nominated me to be the presenter of the Israeli HR Tech startups, but I just nominated myself, but I do lead a group of them here. And I'm just thinking to myself, what would be the difference between those startups that decided to close and not to pivot? What would be, is it a personality issue? Is it the solution itself? What are your thoughts? Because quite a few, I have to say, closed their businesses.
Yes, it's a complex question, and I can just share a couple of thoughts here. As you all know, in 1999, Amazon came this close to shutting down. So it's a situation issue more than a personality issue, perhaps, because you have raised so much money and the bottom falls out of the market. But if you have already raised the money, then you have some way to sustain, right? So it's about that timing. It's also about how you look at customer centricity. If you think of customer centricity as you will do everything to protect your current customer base, then if that happens to be the market that will thrive, you are in luck. But if your customer is fundamentally shifted somewhere else, then your customer centricity should really be focused on finding the new customer, not retaining the customer that's anyway not going to stay with you for too long because they're not successful. So those are my 2 bits. If the panelists want to add anything, they're welcome.
Sure.
I mean, go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead, Bill.
After you.
From my standpoint, our situation was 100% market driven. 20 years ago, we could see that the demand for the type of training that we were offering in the modality that we were offering it was on the decline. We were seeing it in the business, and we were seeing the technology that was coming to the market at that point that was going to change the way people were going to learn. So ours was totally market driven. The only 2 pieces I want to add to what I mentioned before for the startup founders, in the audience here, was the funding aspect of this, because we were a startup in a sense, but we really were pivoting from what was a 6 or 7 year old business, and we were relying on some cash flow from the legacy business to fund this so-called startup. Although I don't think we realized it was a startup at the time. But we ran out of money pretty quick because we weren't getting enough new business to make up from what we were losing from the core business. So from a funding standpoint, we had to make 2 additional decisions. One was to do a convertible notes offering and raise about $500,000, relatively small in today's terms, but it was a big number for us at the time. And the decision we had to make, because we had such a cash crunch, and we had 28 or 30 very, very loyal employees. We knew we were going to need them going forward, is we ended up putting in an employee stock option plan. That decision to put an ESOP in for us might be the single best business decision I ever made.
Yeah, I would say it's very, specific to the situation, but these are tough times. And the CEO's #1 job, or his or her job, is to protect the company. And in times like this, protecting your cash, getting access to your cash, I mean, these can be very, very challenging times. And it all comes into play in terms of how the business had been previously financed. If you've got multiple rounds of capital where you've got different kind of waterfall incentives for investors and everything, everyone's acting differently depending on their security. These are also times where people are gaining new capital at terms that aren't as favorable as they'd like, and those are very, very tough calls. And so it calls to being as cash efficient as you can. It calls for management teams having to make very tough decisions on salaries and reductions to preserve cash and get it through, going forward. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the name of the game, and particularly the venture financing and HR tech, is it all comes down to that ownership you have before you make that exit. So, and we all know these early rounds of financing, even in good times, are the most dilutive. So it really becomes, another permanent or full-time job for a lot of these management teams to get in front of capital, keep their capital happy, find new sources of capital, be as efficient as you can, and do whatever it takes to kind of get you through where you are. But I don't know anyone that isn't really, really thoughtful in terms of their cash burn at this point, and getting and stretching that capital as far as it can. I think we've all been through lots of these situations. These are really tough times, really tough times.
Right. You hit it on the head. I mean, this is the time to stretch the dollar and maintain your speed to market. And I think that's our last substantive slide here. How do you sustain your momentum and keep the business going, protect the business, as Bill said, without burning a hole in your pocket? And there's 3 things you can do. One is you can choose between solving the entire pain point, or focus on your core value proposition and use consulting partners. We worked with a learning management provider. They needed someone to take care of several other things they did not want to invest in. We were doing that. And they focused on their learning management system. That worked out great. Second thing is you have a choice between developing the whole solution or just do something that is unique and then integrate with other products. One of our customers specializes in background check, and they are integrating left, right, and center. They have an aggressive integration plan with all kinds of applicant tracking systems and HR systems because they see a dual potential. They can cross-sell and get growth through partnerships, and they drive a better user experience because users don't need to log in 2 times and pass data back and forth. The third piece where you could stretch the dollar is to choose between building everything in-house versus selectively outsourcing some parts. And I know you're saying outsourcing, yes, that would be some kind of a cost saving or labor arbitrage, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about growing the value of your SaaS business through outsourcing. As the panelists here will tell you, if they have 2 businesses to evaluate, and if one of them has a reliable outsourced vendor, they're going to use a better multiple to evaluate that company. And why is that? That is because transition to another owner is much simpler if you have a stable vendor. In other words, if the owner involvement and the owner dependency in terms of technical work, if that is diluted, it actually counterintuitively grows the value of the business because the discretionary cash flow, as you were, if you adjust for the owner's involvement, works out better because you do not have to replace the owner with a more expensive resource. As long as the technical work is reliably outsourced. So do consider outsourcing for a variety of reasons. You can scale outsourcing up and down. One of our customers is in the employee mobility space. They basically provide a platform for moving employees. And everything suddenly sort of slowed down after the pandemic. But because they were working with us, they could fluctuate the size of the engineering team without having to let go anybody. And we could deploy those same people elsewhere. So that's another advantage. So with that, I'm going to go to first the thank you slide and then back to the panel for any questions. The takeaways are right there.
Dr. Joshi, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap up here. The next session is about to begin.
You saw the takeaways, so let's go. This is who we are. We do product engineering, data engineering, consulting, and we have a team here that can help you through strategy, technology, user experience design, product management. You don't have to go hire people. We have experts here that can spend a few hours and get you going. With that, back over to you, Ward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Joshi and the esteemed panelists. Sorry to rush the ending so quickly. Wow, my brain's already full and the day just started, so I'm excited to see what's coming next. But we got a great